Hello guys, so today we will be talking about 5 basic watercolor tips that is very useful, especially for beginners. First is you need to have a really good reference photo. When I say by really good reference photo, it's important that there is a clear light and shadow, a clear contrast in your reference photo, so that when you apply your colors on the watercolor, it will not look flat, or you wouldn't have any problem identifying where you should put the highlight and where should be the darker tones are. So making sure the contrast on your reference photo is very important. What you could use is download the photo and try to edit it, just enhance the contrast just enough for you to identify the highlights and the darker tones. Now the second one would be materials. Now if you work on a regular sheet of paper, let's say a bond paper, which is very thin, most probably it will not hold up to the amount of water that you will be using. The pages would crumple up, or worse, it would tear up into pieces. So what I love to use is a watercolor paper, which is as low as 180 GSM up to 600 GSM. My most favorite watercolor brand is Fabriano Aquarello, Fabriano watercolor cold pressed, and I also love to use Tokyofinds 300 GSM sketchbook, and I also love to use my Arteza 280 GSM sketchbook, all cold pressed for watercolor. Although there are two types of papers, which is hot press and cold press. Hot press is more smooth. It's really nice if you would like to have that smooth finish like skin, and if you're going to use a colored pencil on top of your watercolor, that would be perfect. But for more abstract, I would suggest to use cold press because it has a rough surface. Now when it comes to your watercolor itself, you don't necessarily need to have the most expensive brand, because technically what I'm using is local brand. I think they are local brands, which is Seamiart watercolor and Giorgione watercolor, especially for most of my pieces, because I do love Arteza watercolor. However, I ran out of them, and so I started exploring other mediums, and you could work with simple ones just fine. Now, third point would be your wet and wet technique. Now, with a wet and wet technique or wet and dry technique, you have to understand which technique is best for your piece. If you would like to have a smoother transition, then it's best to use wet in wet technique, wherein the colors would bleed together because the paper itself is wet. Now if you would like to have a more detailed lines and a detailed, you know, let's say features, then you go for wet and dry, just like what I'm using on this tiger. The first space are all wet and wet technique, where it's easily blended together, but when I work on the fur of the face, I'm using wet on dry technique because I wanted to have that crisp overlapping fur on top of each other. Now the last then the fourth tip that I would give you is colors. You have to study your reference photo and don't just jump into making your watercolor immediately. You have to study what colors or what palette should I be using, what should be my base color. Having that clear understanding in your mindset would allow you to have a better and more smoother transition of your portrait, whether it's, a person or an animal. It would make it more proportional, and it would even make it more realistic at some point. So studying the colors and identifying what you want to use and what complements what color is very important. Now last but not the least is wait to dry. I know it's a daunting task, and it's really lazy to wait for the layer to dry, but that's the best thing that you can do for layers in watercolor. You have to wait for it to dry before you put the next layer in, because if you don't, they will just bleed in together and will be messy, and it's not a perfect piece. It's messy and it's clumpy. So try to have some patience and wait for it to dry before you add your next layer. So that's it, and I hope it's very helpful to you guys. Let me know what you think about this video and this art piece as well. And yes, I was using my Tokyofinds sketchbook. It's 8.5 by 11 inches. And I hope to see you in the future. Let me know what kind of portraits you would like to see. And I would love to try and make them one for you and explain the details and the process to you. So, um, what else? I think that's it. So I'll see you very soon. Have a good day.